Uniformed officers thought they were dealing with just another troubled veteran until they learned the hard way they had tangled with someone far more powerful than they imagined. What would you do if your enemies didn't realize who you truly were until it was too late? Let us know in the comments section below. Nathan Hendrix sat on the edge of his battered leather couch, boots still laced tight from the morning's long walk, when the knock rattled the front door. Not a friendly knock, not the neighborly kind he'd come to appreciate in this sleepy county town. No, this knock had weight behind it, a slow, deliberate pounding that told him whoever stood outside wasn't just passing through. He didn't flinch. Instead, Nathan's hand slid down to the thick file sitting next to him on the couch. Court documents, case notes, a world he'd tried to keep separate from the humble sanctuary of his home. His fingers brushed against the folder before he pushed it aside and rose to his full 6'3" frame, the years of military bearing still evident in every careful movement. The second knock came harder. He heard the heavy scuff of boots on his porch, the muted murmur of radios clipped to belts, the shifting weight of authority. Nathan rolled his shoulders once, loosening them, like a boxer before stepping into the ring. He opened the door. Two men stood there, badges gleaming, wearing the sheriff's department khaki with an edge that went beyond official business. Deputy Mark Leland, 30-ish, square-jawed, and already carrying the cocky arrogance of a man who thought a badge granted him more power than decency. Beside him, Deputy Chris Reynolds, younger, meaner-looking, a wire of restless energy packed under two tight sleeves. Nathan said nothing. He just stared at them with those sharp gray eyes that had once sized up insurgents in the dust of Kandahar. He waited. "Mr. Hendrix," Leland said with a clipped official voice, "you're being served notice. This property's been deemed delinquent. Effective immediately, you're ordered to vacate the premises." Nathan's brows barely twitched. "I paid my property taxes last month." Reynolds smirked, almost like he was enjoying it. "That's not what the records say." Nathan didn't move. He knew corruption when he smelled it. It had the same sour stench whether it was in a war-torn village or hiding behind a polished badge in a town like this. He let the silence stretch long enough to make them uncomfortable. "You have 30 minutes to gather your belongings," Leland added, a hint of false sympathy in his voice. "Failure to comply will result in forcible removal." Nathan's knuckles cracked as he folded his arms slowly across his chest. "You might want to check the records again." Reynolds stepped forward, too close, his breath sharp with coffee and cheap cologne. "Or what, old man? You gonna pull out a gun? Make a real mess of things?" A thin smile touched Nathan's lips. "Not a threat? A promise?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his back on them, a deliberate move that made Reynolds bristle, and stepped back inside, leaving the door swinging open. He could hear them shifting nervously on the porch, radios crackling low with other voices, other plans being laid in real time. Nathan moved through his small living room with quiet efficiency, pulling a slim black binder from a drawer under the coffee table. Inside, crisp sheets detailed every tax payment, notarized and stamped. Every scrap of evidence he needed to show this so-called eviction was a lie. But he wasn't going to hand it over. Not yet. He knew a thing or two about patience, about strategy. You never showed your cards when the enemy thought you were unarmed. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of the old Army photo hanging above the mantel. Younger him in full combat gear, dust-streaked, grinning with his unit after a brutal victory, his brothers in arms, half of them gone now. He touched the edge of the frame briefly, a silent nod to those who'd taught him that survival was as much about endurance as it was about firepower. When he returned to the door, the deputies were still there, getting twitchier by the second. Nathan leaned against the doorframe, the picture of casual calm. "Got a warrant?" Leland hesitated. Reynolds glanced at him sideways like a dog waiting for permission to bite. "No," Leland admitted, "but with the order from the county, we don't need one." Nathan almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying them the way a chess player studies a sloppy opponent. "County clerk's office closed today," Nathan said mildly. "You boys come back tomorrow with a real warrant, or better yet, bring a judge." Reynolds stepped forward again, chest puffed. "We can drag you out right now if we want." Nathan stepped forward too, his boots landing heavy on the porch planks. Now he was close enough that they could see the small, thin scar above his right eyebrow, the one that had never healed right from the firefight outside Fallujah. The one that said he wasn't bluffing. "You can try," Nathan said, his voice low enough that both deputies stiffened instinctively. There was a long, crackling silence. Then, almost sheepishly, Leland tugged at Reynolds' arm. "Come on, let's call it in. Get confirmation." Reynolds spat on the porch, the disrespect sharp as a slap, but he followed his partner down the steps. Nathan watched them retreat to their squad car, radio buzzing with anger and uncertainty. He waited until they were inside, until the doors slammed, until the tires squealed slightly as they backed out onto the street and sped away. Only then did Nathan close the door. He locked it with a quiet click, the sound somehow louder than the knock had been. Then he turned, back to the room, back to the folder of court documents that he'd left open on the couch. At the very top of the pile, stamped in bold letters, were the words, "State v. Leland and Reynolds. Judicial oversight by Judge Nathan Hendrix." Nathan's lips pressed into a tight line. So they thought they could evict him, not knowing he was the man who would soon sit in judgment over their entire corrupt little empire. He picked up the folder and placed it neatly in a briefcase, snapping it shut with deliberate care. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow would be very interesting. And Nathan Hendrix had learned a long time ago, when you're up against cowards hiding behind badges, you don't flinch. You build the case. You stand tall. And you make damn sure justice walk through the front door with you. Nathan Hendrix didn't waste time once the door clicked shut behind him. He knew how these things worked. Pressure tactics, intimidation, corruption wearing a badge and a smirk. He had seen it before, overseas, in villages where bribes dictated life and death, and now here, in a quiet American town that pretended it was immune to rot. The coffee was still warm on the table. He picked up the mug, took a slow sip, and stared at the briefcase on the couch. The knowledge sitting inside that case weighed more than body armor ever had. It wasn't just Leland and Reynolds. It was bigger. Tentacles of influence that reached deep into the sheriff's department, the zoning board, the property assessor's office. The corruption was organized, systemic, smart enough to mask itself under layers of paperwork and bureaucracy, but not smart enough to cover its tracks from someone like Nathan. He had seen the signs long before it touched him directly. Suspicious land seizures, businesses shuttered over phantom violations, families driven out with foreclosure notices signed in the dead of night. All of it tied to a network that siphoned money into the right pockets. And now they had made a mistake. They had come after the wrong man. Nathan moved to the small desk tucked into the corner of the room, pulled open the drawer, and retrieved a spiral-bound notebook filled with his tidy handwriting. Dates, names, transactions, patterns only visible if you knew what to look for. He flipped through it quickly, marking the latest incident at his doorstep. The next phase would come fast. Retaliation always did when cornered animals felt the net tightening. The phone buzzed against the table, a vibration more felt than heard. Nathan picked it up and read the message glowing across the cracked screen. "Saw 2 deputies at your place. You good?" Nathan allowed himself a rare smile. Marcus Taylor, retired Special Forces, now running a small gym in town, trying to stay out of trouble and mostly succeeding. Nathan tapped out a quick reply. "Good. Take ready." He didn't need backup. Not yet, but it was good to know it was there if things escalated. Through the window he could see the squad car parked 2 houses down, pretending to be invisible behind an overgrown oak. Surveillance, so obvious it was insulting. Nathan pulled the curtain shut. Let them watch. Let them report back. Every move they made would dig the hole deeper. He sat back down, pulling the briefcase onto his lap, and opened it. The documents were arranged neatly, color-coded with tabs, witness testimonies, financial statements, wire transfers, affidavits. Enough to ruin careers. Enough to bring the whole rotten structure down around them if handled right. Nathan didn't doubt for a second that the deputies outside had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought he was just another broken veteran clinging to a crumbling house. They thought PTSD made him weak, predictable, easy to scare. They didn't know that Nathan's demons didn't sit behind his eyes, waiting to paralyze him. His demons wore names and ranks. His demons taught him exactly how to endure pressure without breaking, how to spot the enemy in a room full of smiles. They had sharpened him, not shattered him. Another knock echoed, lighter this time, but urgent. He set the briefcase down and answered it without hesitation. On the porch stood a woman in her 40s, clipboard in hand, the county seal printed across the top of her windbreaker. She shifted nervously when he opened the door. "Mr. Hendrix, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Rachel Keene from Code Enforcement. We've had a complaint regarding the condition of your property." Nathan leaned one broad shoulder against the doorframe, saying nothing. Rachel's eyes darted to the parked cruiser, then back to Nathan. Her discomfort was obvious. She wasn't part of it. Not directly. She had been sent. "There's an anonymous report," she continued, voice tight. "Overgrown vegetation, structural concerns, a safety hazard." Nathan raised one eyebrow. His lawn was mowed, his gutters cleared. His house, though small and weather-worn, was solid. "You've inspected it yourself?" he asked. Rachel hesitated. "No, sir. I was just instructed to issue a preliminary notice." "And if I don't comply?" Nathan asked, and feeling genuinely pained. The next step would be fines, then potential condemnation proceedings. Nathan smiled, slow and deliberate. It wasn't for her. It was for the ones listening down the street. "I understand," he said smoothly. "Please make sure to document everything thoroughly. Sign your name to each form. I'd hate for an oversight to complicate your position later." Rachel swallowed hard. She knew he wasn't threatening her. He was warning her. Protect yourself, because when the reckoning came, Nathan Hendrix intended to leave no stone unturned. She scribbled something on her clipboard, handed him a copy of the violation notice with a shaky hand, and hurried back down the steps. Nathan watched her go. The squad car down the street pulled away a minute later, tires grinding against the asphalt. He closed the door again, locked it, and this time pulled the shades. His house might be small, but it was a fortress in its own way. Thick walls, narrow windows, only 2 points of entry. Easy to defend if it came to that. He went into the kitchen and opened a small, rusted tin sitting high on the shelf above the stove. Inside, neatly wrapped in oilcloth, was his old service pistol. A compact, no-frills sidearm he had carried through 2 deployments. He checked it out of habit, loaded, safety on, just in case. Nathan didn't believe in unnecessary escalation, but he also didn't believe in being caught unprepared. Another buzz from his phone pulled him back. This time it was a voicemail from an unlisted number. He played it on speaker. A man's voice, low and gravelly. "You're making things harder than they need to be, Judge. Maybe it's time to remember who really runs this town." Name. No direct threat. Nothing legally actionable. But the message was clear. Nathan stood for a long moment, staring at the phone, his mind turning over the possibilities. On occasion, they were escalating faster than he had predicted. Good. Let them come. He returned to the living room, knelt beside the couch, and pulled a heavy manila envelope from underneath. Inside were copies of everything: the evidence, the witness lists, the whistleblower testimony, duplicates hidden in multiple locations around town, entrusted to people who owed Nathan favors, people who believed in what he was doing. Them to come after him? They could smear his name, drag him through the mud, break down his front door. It wouldn't matter. The truth was already in motion. Nathan straightened slowly, his joints creaking in protest. He picked up the briefcase again and walked into his small study, where a worn American flag was folded neatly in a wooden case on the bookshelf. His father's flag. Vietnam. His father's lessons rang in his ears even now. Don't pick a fight, but never run from one either. Nathan reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a worn, battered business card, the private number of an old contact at the Department of Justice, a man who owed Nathan more than one favor. He slid the card into his breast pocket. Just in case. Not yet, but when he did, it would be the last call this town's good old boy network ever got the chance to ignore. For now, Nathan returned to his place by the window, the folder resting on his knees, the pistol hidden but close. The evening shadows stretched longer across his yard. He sat in silence, watching, waiting. They thought they could break him. They didn't understand. Nathan Hendrix wasn't just defending a house. He was preparing for a war they had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. Deputy Mark Leland slammed the door of the sheriff's department with enough force to rattle the blinds. His face was flushed, jaw set tight as he stormed through the narrow hallways. Officers and clerks glanced up from their desks, but quickly dropped their eyes, pretending not to notice. In a place like this, where power was the only currency that mattered, pretending not to notice was just another way to survive. Leland shoved open the door to the back conference room without knocking. Sheriff Don Keller looked up from his cup of bad coffee, one gray eyebrow lifting lazily. The sheriff was a big man, the kind whose weight and influence had both ballooned over the years. His office still smelled faintly of cigar smoke, even though smoking indoors had been banned a decade ago. "He's not budging," Leland growled, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "That old bastard knows something. He's too calm." Sheriff Keller set down his coffee with a quiet clink. "Of course he knows something. He's a judge, you idiot." Reynolds, trailing behind Leland like a nervous dog, hovered near the door. "He's got papers, Sheriff. Saw a whole briefcase full of them. Court stuff." Keller leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. His eyes, pale and sharp as broken glass, flickered with thought. "You sure he didn't call anyone?" "Not yet," Leland said. "But he's not acting scared either. It's like he's waiting for us to screw up." The sheriff chuckled, a deep, humorless sound. "That's because he knows we already have." There was a long silence. Finally, Keller rose to his feet, moving slowly, the way predators do when they're sizing up their prey. "We can't have Hendrix bringing heat down on us, not now, not when we're this close." Leland stopped pacing. Reynolds stiffened. "You want us to lean on him harder?" Leland asked, the edge of eagerness creeping into his voice. Keller shook his head slowly. "No. You push too hard, he'll push back, and he's got bigger fists than we do. No, we make it look legitimate. We bury him in so much official paperwork he can't breathe." He moved to the window, pulling aside the blinds with 2 fingers. Across the street the diner bustled with lunchtime traffic. Ordinary people, living ordinary lives, never suspecting how much of their town was already sold out from under them. "Start digging," Keller said without turning around. "Old debts, missed inspections, dig up anything that smells even a little dirty. We hit him from every side at once. Make him look like a fraud. Make him fight on so many fronts he forgets which way's up." "And if he doesn't break?" Reynolds asked, voice small. Keller let the blinds snap shut. "Then we remind him that a man alone can still disappear in a town like this." No one said anything after that. Outside, the sun gleamed too bright against the dusty streets. Inside, a quiet war had already begun. Nathan Hendrix felt it before he saw it, a subtle shift in the way people looked at him when he went to town. The way conversation stopped just a little too fast when he entered the hardware store. The way the clerk at the gas station avoided his eyes, hands fumbling the change. It wasn't fear. It was doubt. Planting doubt was always the first tactic. He drove his old Ford pickup through the narrow streets, the engine grumbling in protest, windows rolled down to catch the spring breeze. Every house he passed seemed quieter. Every glance seemed longer. Word was spreading, just like they wanted. Nathan pulled into the gravel lot outside the VFW hall. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the faded mural painted across the front wall. An eagle soaring over a battlefield, its wings stretched wide, its talons fierce. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old wood polish. Men in battered caps with unit patches sipped weak coffee and swapped quiet war stories. These were Nathan's people, or they used to be. He spotted Marcus Taylor near the back, polishing trophies for an upcoming Memorial Day event. Marcus looked up, his broad face breaking into a cautious smile. "Thought you might show up," Marcus said, wiping his hands on a rag. Nathan approached, lowering his voice. "I need to know who's talking." Marcus's smile faded. He glanced around the room, then motioned Nathan toward a side corridor lined with dusty plaques and framed black and white photographs. "It's bad," Marcus said quietly. "Word on the street is you're being investigated. Fraud, misuse of veteran benefits, tax evasion." Nathan almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. It was so perfectly predictable. A page right out of the old playbooks. Smear the man before he can speak. Make the truth sound like a lie before it ever reaches a courtroom. Life. Go to sleep at bed rhythm. "I've got everything documented," Nathan said. "But they're moving faster than I expected." Marcus leaned in closer. "It's not just rumors, Nate. Saw a guy outside your place last night, plain clothes, no badge, but he wasn't hiding the gun under his jacket either. They're trying to spook you." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Let them try. You'll need backup," Marcus said. "You're good, but you're not bulletproof." Nathan thought about it, about the briefcase sitting in his living room, about the documents stashed around town, trusted to a handful of people he knew would stand tall when the time came. "I'm not alone," Nathan said. "Not really." Marcus gave a grim nod. "When you make your move, call me." Nathan clapped him once on the shoulder, then turned back toward the front doors. As he stepped outside, the afternoon light hit him like a wall. He blinked against it and froze. Across the street, parked just a little too neatly behind a battered sedan, was the same unmarked car Marcus had warned him about. Dark windows, engine idling low. Watching. Nathan didn't react, didn't show a flicker of surprise. Instead, he crossed the parking lot at an easy stroll, climbed into his truck, and pulled away without looking back. In the rearview mirror, he caught the car pulling out behind him, keeping just enough distance to be obvious without being official. They wanted him to know. They wanted him rattled. Nathan tapped the steering wheel once, a silent acknowledgement. If they wanted a war, he would give them one. He just wouldn't fight it on their terms. Not here. Not yet. He had learned long ago that the battlefield didn't matter, only the outcome. Nathan didn't need to beat them at intimidation. He needed to beat them at truth. And when he did, he wasn't just going to clear his name. He was going to burn every last lie they'd built and make sure everyone in this town watched it happen. As he drove toward the courthouse, the folder in the passenger seat seemed to hum with quiet promise. Not yet, he thought. Again. It's out. Very simple. Nathan parked the truck 2 blocks from the courthouse, slipping into a side alley where the aging red brick and cracked asphalt gave him cover. He sat still for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the cracked leather of his steering wheel like it held the answers he already knew. They would be expecting him at the courthouse. Eyes hidden behind thick glasses, whispers in the hallways, clerks with instructions whispered through gritted teeth. He didn't care. The courthouse was a battlefield now, and Nathan Hendrix had walked onto plenty of battlefields with less preparation than he had today. He stepped out, briefcase in hand, moving with that slow, deliberate precision that made strangers instinctively step aside. His boots struck the ground with the weight of a man who wasn't running, wasn't hiding. He passed the diner where Miss Ellie usually sat outside selling homemade pies. She avoided his gaze today. He passed the hardware store, the laundromat, the post office, windows full of faces that ducked quickly out of sight when they saw him coming. Fear was contagious. Doubt was contagious. But so was truth. He climbed the courthouse steps 2 at a time and pushed through the heavy oak doors. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old paper, the walls lined with framed portraits of past judges, solemn and heavy in their judicial robes. Nathan caught his reflection in the polished marble floor, creased jeans, faded denim jacket, the briefcase hanging easily from his left hand. He looked nothing like the power players in those portraits. Good. Let them underestimate him. The clerk at the main desk, a young woman he recognized but couldn't name, froze as he approached, her hand tightening visibly on the phone at her side. "Mr. Hendrix," she said, voice brittle. "Can I help you?" Nathan smiled without warmth. "I need to file a motion, judicial misconduct review, full disclosure packet." She blinked at him like he was speaking another language. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a filing form. You'll need authorization," she said, stumbling over the words. "From Judge Holloway." Nathan placed the sealed envelope on the counter. Heavy. Official. His authorization came stamped and notarized from the State Ethics Board. Carefully pulled through back channels, the local system hadn't corrupted yet. "You have it," he said simply. Her eyes darted down, scanning the seal, the signature. He saw the moment she realized she had no choice. She licked her lips nervously and picked up the packet. "I'll get this to him right away," she said. Nathan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to a whisper that only she could hear. "Make sure you do." She nodded, almost dropping the envelope in her haste to flee. Nathan turned from the desk and made his way down the hall toward the records room. His boots echoed with every step. No one tried to stop him. No one dared. The records clerk inside looked up from a battered computer and immediately found something fascinating on his screen. Nathan said nothing. He simply placed a second packet, copies of financial records, land deeds, payments routed through shell companies, onto the counter and tapped it once. The clerk didn't speak. He took the papers with a nod, already knowing what they meant. When Nathan stepped back outside, the sun had dropped lower, painting the town in burnt orange and long shadows. He inhaled deeply, the scent of cut grass and diesel filling his lungs. The first move was made. Now came the backlash. It didn't take long. That night, Nathan woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside his bedroom window. He slid from the bed in one smooth motion, barefoot and silent, retrieving the pistol from the shelf without a second thought. He didn't turn on any lights, didn't make a sound. He moved like a shadow through the house, muscle memory guiding him. At the front window, he pulled the curtain back just enough to see the 2 figures lurking at the edge of his property. No uniforms this time, civilian clothes. Flashlights flicking quickly across his yard, focusing on his porch, his truck, the windows. Looking for vulnerability. Nathan watched, expressionless. He recognized one of them even in the half-light. Deputy Reynolds, too stupid to cover his telltale walk. The other was older, broader, wearing a ball cap pulled low. Another knock at his door, this one almost polite. A tap, tap, tap like a neighbor needing sugar. Nathan didn't move. Tap, tap, tap. Finally, Reynolds' voice, low and taunting. "Come on out, Judge, let's have a little talk." Nathan smiled grimly to himself. They wanted him scared. They wanted him isolated. They wanted him to lash out first, give them an excuse. Instead, he let the silence stretch until the men grew restless. He watched them glance nervously at each other, watched Reynolds shift from one foot to the other. watched the older man mutter something angry under his breath. Eventually they left. No vandalism, no break-in. Not tonight. Nathan waited a full hour before moving again. He sat on the edge of the couch, pistol laid carefully beside him, the briefcase open and documents spread out like a general surveying battle plans. He wasn't going to crack, but he needed to accelerate the timeline. Tomorrow wasn't soon enough. By dawn, Nathan had made his decision. He picked up the burner phone he kept stashed in the crawl space under the house and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. McBride. Nathan didn't bother with pleasantries. The files are moving. I need the DOJ to unseal the indictments. A pause. Then, you sure? They're escalating. I can't guarantee how much longer this stays clean. McBride exhaled sharply. Understood. Give us 12 hours. Nathan ended the call without another word. The trap was set. The bait had been laid. Now all he had to do was wait. By noon, the storm broke. Nathan stood on the front porch, sipping coffee from a chipped mug when the first official vehicle rolled up. Black SUVs, not marked with any department insignia. Men in dark suits spilled out, moving fast, their jackets flapping open to reveal polished badges and holstered weapons. Department of Justice. Federal marshals. And behind them, press vans, cameras rolling, microphones extended like weapons of a different sort. Nathan set his coffee down and straightened his jacket. It was time. Sheriff Keller's cruisers skidded into the street a moment later, lights flashing, siren wailing. He bailed out of the car before it even stopped moving, red-faced, barking orders at his deputies. But it was too late. The marshals moved like a machine, efficient and unbothered, paperwork slapped into the sheriff's chest, subpoenas, warrants, arrest notices. Leland tried to bolt, but 2 agents intercepted him before he made it off the street, pinning his arms behind his back as he cursed and struggled. Reynolds didn't even try to run. He dropped to his knees on the gravel, hands behind his head, mouth working silently in shock. Sheriff Keller wasn't as smart. He shoved one of the marshals, shouting about jurisdiction, about rights, about witch hunts. The agent didn't flinch. He simply placed Keller under arrest too, his voice calm over the rising chaos. Nathan watched it all unfold with the same calm he had carried into enemy territory overseas. No shouting, no drama, just the inevitable, crushing weight of justice falling exactly where it was supposed to. One by one, the badges that had shielded corruption for years hit the ground. One by one, the true cowards were exposed. And Nathan Hendrix stood tall, silent, and unmovable as the town finally saw the truth. Nathan adjusted the sleeves of his dress shirt under the black judicial robe as he stood behind the heavy oak doors of Courtroom 2. The murmurs beyond the door were a low, anxious hum, growing louder as more people packed into the pews. Reporters filled the back rows, their notepads flipping open, cameras set discreetly at their feet. Locals leaned forward, whispering to one another, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the man they had once doubted, the man now about to oversee the trial that had ripped the mask off their community. He took a steadying breath, feeling the even weight of the robe across his shoulders. Not a burden, a reminder, a symbol that he had not fought for himself, but for something far larger. Justice that did not bend to threats, to backroom deals, to fear. The bailiff, a stocky Marine veteran named Joe Ramirez, who Nathan had personally vouched for, gave him a nod. "Ready, sir?" Nathan returned the nod without speaking. Joe pushed the door open. The crowd fell into a sudden, charged silence as Nathan entered the courtroom and approached the bench, each step echoing in the stunned hush. The clerk called the room to order, and everyone rose to their feet. Nathan took his seat behind the bench, gavel resting lightly under his hand. He waited a heartbeat longer before signaling the room to be seated. He scanned the room with calm, piercing eyes. Sheriff Don Keller, his face sagging with defeat, sat handcuffed at the defendant's table beside a red-faced Mark Leland and a pale, twitching Chris Reynolds. Their defense attorneys sat stiff and silent, understanding fully the futility of the ground they stood on. Nathan opened the first file on his desk. A heavy sheaf of charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, illegal seizure of private property, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. The list went on, each word printed in black ink, another nail in the coffin of their once untouchable power. The courtroom smelled of nervous sweat and stale coffee. Nathan's voice, when it finally came, was steady as bedrock. "We are gathered today under the authority of the people of this county and the broader mandate of the Department of Justice," he began, his words clear enough to carry to the farthest row. "What has transpired here is not merely a betrayal of individual citizens, but a corruption of the very institutions sworn to protect them." He paused, letting the weight of it settle over the room. "For too long, certain individuals," he said, glancing briefly at the defendants, "believed they were above the law. Today, we remind them and ourselves that no one is." The first witness was called, a petite woman in her 60s, Mrs. Clara Benson, who had owned a small antiques shop seized under false pretenses last year. Her hands shook slightly as she took the oath, but her voice, when she spoke, was firm. "Head, they said my place was unsafe," she said, glaring at Keller with a fire that belied her age. "Said I owed back taxes. I had receipts. Proof. They didn't care." Nathan listened, taking notes, but letting the woman speak without interruption. The truth, once given space to breathe, was more devastating than any lawyer's arguments. More witnesses followed: small business owners, families who had been bullied out of homes passed down through generations, veterans who had returned to find their promised protections twisted into traps. Nathan watched each testimony carve another piece off the defendant's defense, exposing the rot underneath. At one point, Leland's attorney objected, claiming character assassination. Nathan leaned forward slightly, voice cool. "The character of the defendants is not on trial. Their actions are." Objection overruled. As the proceedings wore on, the evidence piled higher and higher. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, phony inspections rubber-stamped by friends of the sheriff, emails and text messages full of smug jokes about easy payoffs. Every document, every photograph, every affidavit meticulously laid out, in a chain that even the best defense could not unbreak. Nathan called a recess late in the afternoon, letting the tension simmer in the overheated room. He stood quietly as the crowd filed out, reporters buzzing into phones, citizens murmuring prayers of gratitude or curses at their former protectors. He stayed behind after the room emptied, staring down at the files spread before him, his hands folded carefully on the bench. There was no joy in this, no triumph. Justice wasn't about vengeance. It was about setting things right, even if the scars never fully healed. Joe Ramirez approached from the side door, his footsteps respectful. "You okay, Judge?" Nathan looked up, giving the faintest ghost of a smile. "Better than I've been in a long time." Joe grunted. "Town's buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. They're talking about putting up a statue, naming a street after you." Nathan chuckled, a dry, low sound. "Let's wait until the verdict's read before we start carving anything in stone." Joe hesitated, then added quietly, "We needed this, sir. We needed to believe again." Nathan's chest tightened briefly. He nodded once, dismissing the sentiment before it could dig too deep. There was still work to do. As evening crept toward night, Nathan returned to the bench. The final motions were filed, the final witnesses sworn. When he gavelled the court back into session, the weight in the room was almost visible. He addressed the jury, a cross-section of the very citizens the defendants had once preyed upon. "You have seen the evidence," he said. "You have heard the testimonies. Now it falls to you to decide. Is the law a shield for the people or a weapon for the powerful?" The jurors were solemn as they rose and filed into the deliberation room. Nathan sat back, folding his hands again, waiting. It didn't take long. 45 minutes later, the jury returned. Nathan watched the foreman, a wiry man with a blue-collar tan and calloused hands, stand and face the room. In a matter of the People versus Sheriff Don Keller, Deputy Mark Leland, and Deputy Chris Reynolds, the foreman read, voice steady, "We find the defendants guilty on all counts." The breath that left the courtroom was almost a physical thing, a collective exhale of long-held fear and tension. Nathan allowed himself a small nod. He turned his gaze to the defendants, who sat in stunned silence, as though the reality of their downfall was only now sinking in. "This court thanks the jury for its service," Nathan said formally. "Sentencing will proceed tomorrow." He banged the gavel once, sharp and final. Court adjourned. As Nathan rose, the entire room rose with him, not just out of custom, but out of something deeper: respect, gratitude, hope. For a long moment, Nathan stood there, feeling the eyes of the town on him, feeling the weight of every injustice that had been righted, every wound that had started, at last, to heal. Then he stepped down from the bench, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor, and walked out of the courtroom, not as a man running from his past, but as one who had finally, fully reclaimed his future. The sun was setting outside, bathing the courthouse steps in gold. And for the first time in a long, long time, Nathan Hendrix smiled without hesitation. The morning after the verdict, Nathan Hendrix stood on his front porch, a mug of black coffee cradled in his hand. The air smelled cleaner somehow, the morning sun climbing over the rooftops with a quiet warmth that hadn't touched this town in a long time. Across the street, neighbors who once averted their eyes now waved as they passed. Cars honked not in anger, but in greeting. The street, once silent and heavy with suspicion, now buzzed softly with life again. Nathan took it in slowly, savoring it. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding his breath these past few years, how much the weight of injustice had pressed down on him even before it landed on his own doorstep. Now it was different. Now the town was beginning to heal. He sipped his coffee and turned to glance at the front of his house. Someone, he didn't know who, had planted small flags along the walkway during the night, red, white, and blue fluttering gently in the breeze, lining the path like a quiet tribute. At the foot of the porch steps, a hand-painted sign rested against the bottom rail. "Thank you, Judge Hendrix. You stood when we couldn't." He crouched down, tracing the words with the tips of his fingers. There was no signature. It didn't need one. The sound of an engine brought his head up. A battered pickup truck pulled into his drive, the bed loaded down with wood and tools. Marcus Taylor hopped out, waving a hand high above his head. "Morning, Nate," Marcus called. "Brought some reinforcements." Before Nathan could respond, 2 more trucks rumbled in behind Marcus. Men and women, old and young, veterans and civilians alike, piled out, carrying toolboxes, lumber, paint cans. Someone whistled cheerfully as they began pulling materials out onto the lawn. Nathan set his coffee down and descended the steps. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "You kept the wolves at bay, brother. Least we can do is help you fix up the place." Nathan looked at the crowd gathering on his lawn, faces he recognized from town meetings, from parades, from years of silent nods at the grocery store. Some he didn't recognize at all. It didn't matter. They were here now. "You don't have to," Nathan said quietly. Marcus grinned. "We know. That's why it matters." Nathan chuckled, low and genuine, and without another word he grabbed a hammer from the nearest tool kit and got to work. By mid-morning, the old fence that had sagged in the backyard for years was gone, replaced with fresh posts standing proud and strong. The porch rails were sanded and repainted. Broken shutters were replaced, new house numbers hung on the front post. Someone even repotted the sad little flower beds with bright bursts of color. The laughter rolled across the yard like music. Kids chased each other between the work crews, dogs barked from neighboring yards, and for the first time in a long while, Nathan let himself feel it without reservation. Just after noon, Miss Ellie from the diner arrived, carrying 2 large trays loaded with sandwiches and sweet tea. She set them up on a makeshift table and called out for everyone to take a break. Nathan found himself pulled into a conversation near the porch, surrounded by a knot of veterans who had driven in from neighboring towns just to lend a hand. They swapped stories, some funny, some heavy, with that easy shorthand only service members understood. Nathan laughed along with them, feeling the years peel off his shoulders with every word. "Thought about running for mayor, Nate?" one of the vets joked, nudging him with an elbow. Nathan shook his head, smiling. "I think I've had enough politics to last a lifetime." "Bet the courthouse needs you," another chimed in. "Hell, we all do." Nathan leaned back against the porch railing, watching the way people moved now. Open, unafraid, rebuilding not just his home, but something bigger, something that would last. "I'm right where I'm supposed to be," Nathan said, voice sure. The town would have new leaders soon, ones that earned their place. The corruption that had festered for years had been rooted out, its grip broken not by violence, but by truth and courage. Nathan knew it wouldn't be perfect. No place ever was, but it would be better, because good people had finally remembered they had the power to make it so. The afternoon wore on, and by sunset the house looked like something out of a memory Nathan thought he'd lost, a place that stood tall and proud, just like the man who lived in it. The final touch came when the town council president, a grizzled Navy veteran named Harris Miller, arrived with a plaque wrapped in blue velvet. He waited until the sun was low and the work was done before calling everyone together at the foot of the porch. "We can't undo what happened," Harris said, voice thick with emotion, "but we can honor the man who showed us who he could be." He pulled back the velvet, revealing a simple bronze plaque. Nathan Hendrix, veteran, judge, neighbor. He stood when it mattered. The applause that followed wasn't raucous, it was steady, solid. It was the sound of gratitude, of recognition, of a town finding its heart again. Nathan accepted the plaque with quiet grace, his throat too tight for words. He shook Harris's hand firmly, holding it longer than necessary, letting the unspoken understanding pass between them. Later, when the crowd thinned and the evening grew cool, Nathan sat on his newly repaired porch, the plaque resting against the steps beside him. Marcus pulled up a chair and handed him a cold bottle of beer. "You did it," Marcus said simply. Nathan tilted his head back, watching the stars begin to pepper the night sky. "No," he said, "we did it." The 2 men sat there in comfortable silence, the weight of the past finally lifting, the future wide open before them. From the darkened edges of the yard, crickets began their nighttime chorus. The American flags along the walkway snapped gently in the breeze, and somewhere deep in the bones of the town, a healing had begun, that no badge, no title, no fear could ever undo again. Nathan Hendrix smiled into the night, feeling for the first time in what felt like a lifetime that he was finally truly home, and this time no one was ever going to take it from him again.